So I'm male and the bike costs a lot of money. So I literally fell sideways, uncleated, and kicked the bike into the heather and slid down the road. Yeah.
Wow. You know what this is? You know what this story's begging for, Dave? And I think you're the person to do it. One of those LinkedIn long posts where you can tell everybody what lessons you've learned around, say, like, welcome to Cloud Realities, an original podcast from Capgemini. And this week we are going to look at this concept of organizational purpose. What is it? Does it have any merit? And are there any alternatives to how we think about aligning our organizations? I'm Dave Chapman.
I'm Esmee van der Giezen.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And we are back after Christmas. It's our first one back. It is freezing January. Ez, did you have a wonderful Christmas? I know you were out traveling the world.
Yes, so after traveling the world, I got a huge tan, which I'm still exploiting till today. And I spent time with family and friends, so it was lovely. And also to be in the cold with Christmas still feels like the best way to celebrate Christmas, to be honest.
Yes, you said you were struggling with a sunny Christmas.
Yep.
When did you get back?
Like the day before Christmas, actually.
Oh, right. So you actually, I didn't realize you were actually back in Europe for Christmas itself.
Yeah. Yep.
Just think about the poor Australians who have a sunny Christmas every year. I always thought that would be weird. Christmas tree in the corner, but the barbecue's out going and the sun's blazing.
It doesn't work for us, at least, I think, because we're so used to, being able to put on skis or ice skating. And it's just that warm Christmas feeling.
See, I was all right with it. I've experienced it on a couple of times in my life, I'm happy to say. And the only thing that surprised me, like I think we talked about in the Christmas episode, was the fact that they haven't updated any Christmas iconography to represent the weather in their particular region. So, like,
right.
Still
got snowmen and things
Santa
like this
in a
sliding around.
giant, kind of warming jacket and snowmen and things like that. That was the only sort of dissonance that I had. I was actually okay with like a barbecue for Christmas dinner.
Like getting a suntan on Christmas Day. That's what you're saying.
Nice.
Yeah.
What did you do this Christmas then?
So now I was in the UK this year. So I think I was hosting a lot of people, and it was lovely. Actually, it was very family orientated. Enjoyed it quite a bit. How about you, Robert? How are you doing? Did you enjoy it?
I was all right. A quiet Christmas. Tried to get away to go skiing for New Year's, and travel chaos chaos ensued, which was interesting. I spent far too long in airports.
Spectacular, it's fair to say. So before you tell the story, it's probably worth saying that when Rob went on his summer holiday, he was stuck on a plane without air conditioning for, what was it, 5 hours, Rob?
5-6 hours for 2 days. And then eventually the plane worked and off we went. But the flight was cancelled. Yeah.
And then you had to overnight and then you had to go back the next day.
That's right.
And we were like, oh, God, mate, that was unlucky, wasn't it? That surely it's never going to happen again, is it? So, Rob, what happened this time?
Well, the first thing happened was we tried to get on the plane and there was fog. So the flight got cancelled after we sat on the plane for a few hours. We couldn't get a slot. So that was an overnighter. Family into hotel, then family back out of hotel. We eventually got to our destination a day late. Lost a day's skiing. And then on the way back, air traffic control decided they didn't have enough people and our flight was cancelled again. So another overnighter and then back to the airport. And then eventually, after many, many hours delay on a flight that should have left hours before, we eventually got home. So I must admit, in the last 4 family flights, 3 have been cancelled. So I'm pretty convinced one member of my family is cursed with flying.
It is rough, and with all your travel preparations as well.
No,
Rob, this
doesn't matter. It doesn't count for anything when and it's all like fog or traffic control. You can't do anything about it.
It feels deeply unkarmic. I have to say, given the amount of effort and anxiety you put into traveling, that something like that would happen.
I go out of my way to try and make it smooth and by the numbers, and this was anything but the bit in the middle was very, very good. So there you go.
It is justice, though. I mean, I climb mountains. We have a phrase: if you don't climb up, you shouldn't be allowed to slide down.
Just because I using the excellence of engineering to allow me to get to the top much faster.
Yeah, it damages the mountainside.
Yeah, there we go. So look, you've heard him. So let me quickly introduce Dave Snowden. Dave, it is great to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, yeah.
It is very nice to see you. And how was your Christmas?
Well, we have 3 families involved in a new grandchild who's now just over a year old. So you have to wait for your allocated day.
The magic of Christmas comes back in
once you've got your allocated day for the grandchild, you work everything else around it. So I went went to the Lake District for a week before Christmas and then
Wonderful.
a week after, and went up to Urari for 3 days between Christmas and the New Year. So I tried to spend my time in the mountains when I've got time.
That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. The Lake District, obviously particularly beautiful for that kind of thing, but also a really good foodie scene in the lakes these days. Do you engage with any of that?
No, because I did my first Wainwright round in 40 days, and I'm now doing my second one in 45.
Right.
So if I'm up there, it's sort of get up, walk with a head torch, finish with a head torch, and grab something when you get back to the cottage before starting again the next day. So,
wow, good going. Good going. So Dave has joined us today. He runs the Cynefin Centre, and we've talked to Dave on the show before, and we've used his thinking on the show, or at least attempted to before. So we're delighted to have Dave join us for this conversation, which we will get to shortly. But before that, what are you confused about this week, Rob?
Well, David, it's a good one this week, which was, if you remember in the Christmas episode, one of the things we predicted in 2025 was the AI bloopers.
Yeah.
And it would be, they're coming.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. I know exactly where you're going with this.
So lots of controversy with people getting news alerts that AI had consolidated on their phone, which was taking a very trusted editorial source and corrupting the news to almost be completely different. So people are getting these AI notifications on their phones and they're just blatantly wrong and telling news that just isn't true. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, especially with the news sources. The BBC was a big one.
Do you have, before you go on, do you have a specific example? Like, did it literally turn around, kind of 180 degrees the news, or did it just slightly tweak it to a point where it lost its meaning?
No, it created news about the story that was completely and totally incorrect, like the individual in custody had died, or that somebody had won the championship long before the final had ever taken account. So it was actually just it hallucinated to a level where it was making very significant statements about a news story that just weren't true. So this is bad. This is bad because people trust the Apple platform, people trust these edited news sources, and then suddenly there's this corruption coming through, which is, so my confusion is around, is this a massive incident that's going to affect trust in AI with people? Because this was very widely reported as being just completely wrong. And is it going to cause an impact on society's adoption of it? Or is it just a blooper and we'll get over it and we'll move on? And the confusion is about, has it dented people's opinion of what AI is? Because a lot of people still don't properly understand AI. This was their first foray into it. The system's doing it for them, all that sort of stuff. They didn't really have to do anything other than accept the terms and conditions to switch it on. Has this completely knackered the trust, or is it people who go, yeah, whatever, let's move on now? And that's what I'm confused about.
I've got to say, I'm solidly in the latter camp on that one.
I honestly think people just go, hey, move on, don't care.
One of those things, and I don't think they'll. I mean, some people will, but I think it will be a smaller minority than you would ideally want that would lean into some of the issues that what you've just described might suggest for us going forward. I think the majority of people, it will just pass them. They might see it trending on X or something and be like, have a quick look at it and then move on.
Well, it's interesting that, because you look at it did really just make stuff up. It was really bad. It wasn't like a subtle fact change. It was like a massive shift in the story position.
Was it one or two stories, or was it like tens or hundreds?
No, it was one or two very big ones. And the way they stitched it together, it obviously just messed everything up. And it shows you that they've rushed to implement it. What has this gone through from a QA perspective? Do they really understand how it's working? Or is it just the AI arms race meant we have to get it out fast, and it's damaged opinion?
I think the arms race is certainly a factor in why something like that is out now. It just in terms of how it functions, it seems jerry-rigged to me, that platform, to be honest with you. If you read that, what would it do to your level of confidence? Is it something you'd be like, they'll fix this going forward, or do you think you would switch it off?
Well, it actually makes me think about when first in digital customer experiences. I don't know if you remember that there were at least people thinking that you get special discounts if you had an Apple, or have lower discounts because you were the ones, if you have an Apple or a MacBook, then, presumably you have more money to spend. And then you also saw some advertisement. I don't know if you remember that, but somebody was Googling for a baby stuff. And then the dad actually got advertisement with a lot of baby stuff, and that went completely wrong. And I think those were stories that were really in the news, or at least on top of the mind of a lot of our customers. And then suddenly it just it went to the background, because now we have smarter, and no, we're not doing that anymore. We have extra control mechanisms in there. And then I think you will be convinced that it's safe enough. But it depends on how many more stories are speeding up and what scale, I think.
Yeah, presumably now it's been stopped and they've actually been fined or whatever, they'll wind that back. But Dave, we've never had a chance to talk about the rise of AI, because I think even just as you came on the show last time, we were in very early days of ChatGPT, and obviously it's accelerated at an absolutely crazy rate over the last 18 months or so. What's your perspective on Rob's observation there?
I think, there was a paper I read recently which is really good. It says human beings hallucinate, AI bullshits.
Right.
But actually, hallucination is key to human decision making. So I think there's a couple of things. First of all, AI is entirely based on text and tokens. So that's about 5 to 10% of what human beings know anyway. Yeah. And so if you confine intelligence, and it's not intelligence, it's inference, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the training data sets determine what you get. The training data sets are all text. Yeah, most of the time, for example, we use pheromones to determine trust, not what people say. So there's far more to human decision making than we think, all right? So that's one problem. And the danger is we're going to dumb people down. The danger with AI is not that it exceeds us in intelligence, but we become hyper dependent on it. And so there's already evidence. There's loads of papers coming out which show how we lose cognitive capability if we use AI.
Oh, is that a bit like I had a knee injury over the summer last year, and it was terrifying how fast my thigh muscle atrophied.
Got it. And it's the same principle, all right? So, I can smell snow coming. My children can't. I grew up in the country. It's that sort of thing.
Mad.
So I think that's a real danger, all right? And there was somebody who regards himself as a thought leader, who said he's spending 6 to 7 hours a day on AI. And it's like,
that doesn't sound
what
right.
the hell? Well, that just, my view is, that there's consultancy studies on this which show it can increase productivity. If you had increased productivity using AI, it means your consultancy was pretty crap in the first place. Yeah. So, ChatGPT is a much better search mechanism than Google.
No question.
But the energy consumption is really scary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
10x.
And also, you can find things in books. So the danger is, and you can't trust the data anymore. Well, it's fairly easy to determine what it is. And the pictures are so stereotypical. So I think the trouble is the dumbing down of intelligence, which AI causes, is people aren't. So I think companies that maintain human decision making will have competitive advantage. And it's very significant that the American elite schools, where the tech bros send their children, have banned technology from the classroom.
That is highly significant, isn't it? I remember you mentioned that last time we spoke, and I've talked about that a lot since, because it's extremely meaningful. I wouldn't mind digging into that just for a second, actually. And from what you've seen, what are they varying in their teaching after they've got computers out of the classroom? My read on it was, presumably they think like information age teaching is broadly done. So
it's how you find things. I mark up books when I read them, right? I had to find something. I remembered something vaguely from university last year. And I found the book. Within 2 seconds, I found what I was looking for. Yeah, because I've marked up the book with different colored pens. My fingers have memories. I sort of remember the context. Human memory is very fragmented like that. And that's a search mechanism, right? If I just did keyword search, then I would only find things which match what the word said. Yeah, and that's a real problem, right? So I think we're letting a tool go out of hand. So if I'm going to be really rude, most of the AI has been around for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And I remember saying 20 years ago, is what matters is the training data sets, not the algorithms. So the only thing that's just changed is the ability to scrape more data and create more sophisticated training data sets. The algorithms haven't changed much, right? And, you need to use these things as tools, not bio-re-engineer the brain to fit the tools. We've allowed consultancy to get to the point where all you do is regurgitate material from other projects. Well, AI is always going to do that better.
Right. Very good thought. So, Rob, has that helped you out?
No, it's opened up a whole more set of can of worms, quite frankly.
I think we've done quite a good job with
we
that.
shall return to this one, I think, because I'm pretty confident there'll be more bloopers coming. And I was just interested to see how society reacts to it. But
I think the discussion there was an appropriately messy discussion about a messy subject. Is probably what I would say. And far from untangled. But look, thank you for that. Let's move on to our conversation today, which is going to be about organizational purpose. Quite a bit. So, Dave, how's life in the Cynefin Centre? What have you guys been up to?
A whole range of things. So we're working a lot on OD and culture measure. But we just launched a new sort of standard offer around measuring culture, which is using cartoons as a trigger point. So that's built on semiotics.
Oh. How does that work then?
So we got two running, one with Gaping Void, the other with Comic Agile.
Right.
So you have 6 cartoons. You choose the cartoon which represents your culture. You tell a story about why. You then index that onto a set of indexes derived from cultural anthropology. And that all costs you, less than £1,000 for 3 months, and you get a standard report every week. So what it shows you is culture represented as collections of narrative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the cartoons are really powerful because they trigger people to think differently.
Oh, wow. That sounds quite interesting, actually. And there's that must, I mean, as you deployed it, that must open a lot of eyes internally about how the culture actually works within an organization with leadership. Is there a lot of surprise in that process, or do people really always knew?
No, we've been doing it for years. The trouble is it takes a lot of persuasion. So one of the things we've done is to put the automation in so people can now buy it with a credit card rather than run a project.
Very good.
And just play with it. And we got another one out at the moment on AI and the role of AI in your company. And again, the idea is gather people's real world experiences, get them using high abstraction metadata. So we're avoiding text.
Right.
That human beings don't work well with text and tokens. AI does, human beings don't. So we're using abstractions. And what that allows us to do is to create narrative maps, which, if you want the technical language, is an assemblage or a strange attractor.
Right.
So it's a pattern of belief or attitude which you can measure at scale. So, for example, I can produce the map for the whole company, right? And the executives can look at the map and say, well, look, we'd like more stories like these and fewer stories like those. Which, by the way, is one of the ways you create a purpose. Yeah. So I need more like this, fewer like that, not I need to achieve this goal. So that's concrete. But then each division or each work group has their own map from the source data. So every map actually looks different. So everybody's going in a different direction. But the system is starting to align, and that's called fractal engagement. What you don't want is generic company-wide programs because, that's homogenization. It's the lowest common denominator.
The thing that it immediately suggests to me is how much of them come out looking like a Dilbert cartoon?
We actually pre-select the cartoons, so you can, if you want, customize that. So I'll send you the link. So Comic Agile have got some. I mean, the thing about cartoons is they can say really hard things in a way that you have to laugh.
Yeah, that you can swallow them a little bit easier.
But you can't swallow them easier. So Gaping Void is the other one. So for non-agile group, we've got the Gaping Void cartoons, which are really harsh. I mean, there's some on the wall behind me there, right? Including my favorite of all time, which is the one with the red cross and the slogan, same cross, different nails. And that makes you think. So cartoons, this is basic 101 cognitive neuroscience. We do not think about a subject unless we detect an anomaly.
Right.
All right. So what cartoons do is they create anomalies. So you start to think. Whereas if you're responding to a questionnaire with standard questions and Likert scales, you don't have to think about it. You just mark it as you go.
It's quite interesting. Does that feel very different for the organisations you interact with around it? Is it a big leap for them to start to work in this way and introduce things like
It is. That's one of the reasons why we've produced a sub £1,000 buy it and see. So people can. What we found is when people will have their own narrative, they get it instantly.
Yeah.
When they just have demonstrations using other people's narrative, that's more difficult. So what you're doing here is you're creating a very high level of intimacy for C-level. And you're creating a new mechanism of communication because they can say, well, I want more stories like these and fewer stories like those.
Yeah.
Those are real stories from the workforce, not something which the executive is creating or a big consultancy is creating for them. So it changes the dynamics of communication.
Well, let's maybe use that as a bridge then into the subject that we're going to hopefully interrogate a little bit today. So the background to this session that we're doing today is like I said, we've had Dave on the show before. We've had a couple of interactions, and I follow him on LinkedIn and a few other things. And I'd noticed that he'd been posting a little bit on purpose and responding to some posts on organizational purpose that others were making. And very briefly, organizational purpose is set out to be something that, gives an organization potentially a reason to exist. It potentially guides that organization in how it achieves its goals and the direction it wants to go in. It can be sometimes called things like a North Star. And the idea is that an organization sets down what it believes in and heads in that direction. And these things can be very easily understood in founder-based organizations, where generally a person has started a company because they want to do a particular thing, and that thing can be the purpose of the organization. Or to the other end of the spectrum, I think Google has set out its purpose, or it did previously, to make all of the world's information searchable. And we think it's interesting in the context of what we talk about on the show sometimes around organizational change and sort of new ways of working, if you like, is that it can, in a very empowered and decentralized organization, having unifying purpose or direction can help an organization broadly head in the right direction, but without over micromanaging everybody that's in to do certain things. And Dave had been, quote unquote, playing around with the idea of alignment based on rich local interactions to achieve coherence in organizations as an alternative to purpose statements, North Stars and the like. So Dave, before we dive into the depths of where you've got to with your thinking on it, for you, what's the role of purpose in a business? Or feel free to replace the word purpose with any word of your choosing.
It's to generate money for consultants every 2 to 3 years, to get a workshop of senior executives, produce a list of platitudes on a flip chart, and tell people.
So it has got value then. That's what you said.
And also, all the political players will then do find and replace on their word processing document to change whatever they were going to do anyway to use a new language of power.
Yes.
And sorry,
right.
We went from value statements, mission statements, purpose statements. We now got deep purpose. I mean, that book's out, all right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just complete and utter crap, right? Nobody actually has a purpose statement for their family or for their friends.
Right.
And there's a really good test. If you wouldn't do it for your extended family and friends, why the hell are you doing it for your employees?
Now, do you see the point about being a startup? If you start a business, you're doing that for a particular reason, you would think. Like, what would you say the purpose for the Cynefin Centre is?
Okay. We would never write it down. We wouldn't be that hypocritical. I think the other thing is we kind of like mostly understand it. I mean, but purpose is generally, if you look in hunter-gatherer communities, they don't have purpose statements, but people understand what they're trying to do together. And that contains what we call requisite ambiguity. Part of the problem we got for the last 20 or 30 years, and you can blame systems thinking for this, because going back to Sengi, all right, who popularized it for the first time, the idea is you handle uncertainty by defining where you want to be.
Right.
And of course, then you define where you want to be in text. In order to get consensus across all the players, you end up with platitudes. Mm-hmm. There's nothing really concrete in it. It's just a generalized statement of goodness. So, I sometimes call these 42 solutions, which is a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the entry for Earth, mostly harmless. All right. But the danger is, I still remember this. When I was in IBM, I was at a board meeting, and we changed the brand. And the brand went from this to on demand, right? And I got asked by somebody very senior, what did I think of this from a complexity perspective?
Right.
And I was really irritated because I spent 9 months of my life working on this bloody thing with Ogilvy and Mather, and it was obvious my boss's boss had not given me any of the credit for it. Never upset the Welsh or the Irish. We get really angry when we get this, all right? And we go into suicide mode. And I remember saying it's a great way of finding out who you're going to fire.
Right.
And there was this silence, and somebody said, "What do you mean by that, buddy?" Buddy is a danger sign with American sea level, all right? It's right. Like a rattlesnake. And I said, well, anybody who's changed their slide set from this to on demand this in 6 months is obviously a game playing sycophant, so I assume you're going to fire them. roar of laughter because, of course, everybody around the board had done exactly that.
Right.
Because they know how to play the game. All right. And, at least 1/3 of them loved me for it and took me out for dinner. The other third hated me and the third were confused. But that's a reasonable ratio. Yeah. So, and anything explicit will be gained. So you have several problems. First of all, if you're dealing with a complex adaptive system, which you are, you shouldn't try and define a future state because you're bound to get it wrong. Yeah, what you need to do is to define where you are and define a direction or directions of travel. All right? You may actually need to have parallel paths or different paths and see what works or doesn't work before you commit. Yeah? So it's more important to understand the present than it is to actually have patterns of the future. And this is 101 physics, all right? Whatever has the lowest energy gradient is probably going to happen. So if you don't understand the energy gradients of where you are, you can't understand what is even possible next. So this idea that you can define a state and drag people behind it is just wrong. Yeah.
In a situation, though, where you haven't got a defined sort of destination and you're setting up, say, one or multiple paths to experiment your way to something new, how do you avoid sort of confusion in that?
There's several things. First of all, if you look at traditional storytelling, so people who are consultants need to look at what has evolved in humans over centuries. We don't tell our children stories about how Janet and John stayed at home, achieved a family purpose statement, and had their pocket money based on their KPIs or their OKRs.
Oh, I didn't know that. I've implemented that in my house.
Introducing family KPIs, that's on, next on the agenda.
What we actually do is all fairy stories tell negative stories. Every single fairy story you read is a negative story because each generation is sharing its failures. So one of the ways you create alignment is to agree what you don't want to be. And that's much easier to get consensus on than what we do. And that's actually how most ethics works, by the way. Sorry, my background's philosophy and physics, so you'll see both of those come through. So defining the stories about what we don't want to be opens up the possibilities to actually find places you didn't know in advance you wanted to go to. And that's the purpose in traditional storytelling. We're not trying to restrict kids to what we think they should do, but we're passing on the stories of our own failure so they don't make the same mistakes. So that's one thing you can do. Yeah. The other thing is you can't homogenize purpose to the whole company. Different parts of the company will have different goals, different objectives, different next steps.
Sure.
Yeah. And a huge amount of people don't want to be involved in the corporate. They just want to be told what to do and get their jobs done and get some money so they can go and do what they really want to do outside the company. It's an OD myth. And by the way, organizational development have a Stockholm syndrome relationship with their CEOs. It's an OD myth that everybody wants to be a highly motivated individual. I think it's the overburden of Billy Graham type evangelism on the American management consultants. Yeah, everything is meant to be a transformation or a conversion experience, rather than a pragmatic day-to-day activity.
In a situation then where an organization does want to move to something different, whatever that might look like, desperately trying to avoid words like transformation, but wants to move in a certain direction, and let's say that company's got a relatively decentralized decision-making structure, or they've tried to, devolve power down into team.
Well, then they can't anyway.
Say more on that.
Anything explicit will be gamed. The minute you write a purpose down or you state a purpose, people will find ways to say they're doing that. We really are very good at that. Yeah. On the other hand, if you want, and we can talk about distributed decision making later if you want, that's the big thing we're working on at the moment.
Yeah. Let's get to that.
Because distributed decision making is not about delegating, it's about distributing to role combinations. So what you really want is lots and lots of small decisions being made with fast feedback loops. Then you can decide which decisions actually, with the benefit of hindsight, are going in the right direction and give more energy to them. Yeah, so that's really important because you want to find ways which are sustainable rather than ways which are idealistic.
That I agree with. And in terms of this distributed decision making of a series of sort of fast decisions and then rooting out the good ones to set direction.
No, it's more complex than that. So we evolved to make decisions in sexual pairs, extended families, and clans. Now, if you're in a clan, you conform with the clan values because the clan has got to stay together.
Yeah.
Right? if you're in the extended family, the maximum number of active decision makers in the extended family is 7.
Mm-hmm.
And groups of 7 or less will compromise. So I ran a big workshop the other day. I've got doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, social workers. Nobody will break away from their clan. If I take one person from each clan and put them into small groups, they'll come up with novel ideas. This comes from theoretical biology. It links with Dunbar's number, but it's got a sounder base to it. So one thing, and the other thing is we evolved to make decisions in roles, not as individuals. We're really bad individual decision makers. But we're really good in role combinations. And it's why in military environments, in civil defense, in medical environments, people make decisions in role combinations. A surgical team is a combination of roles with ritualized entry into the roles. So what we do is we identify, let's take a maximum number of 5. We identify 4 roles who are relevant to a decision. The 5th role is then completely anonymous, so nobody knows who it is. That creates a panopticon effect. Because if you're being observed, but you don't know who the observer is, you have to be honest. And those groups are authorized to spend $1,000, $5,000 without actually applying for a grant, provided they record the stories of context, the decision, and the consequence.
All right.
So that way, instead of having to decide where to allocate 50 million, I can allocate $51,000 amounts to people who can self-form teams across silos. And then the real money can follow the things which are working rather than the people who are good at advocating what will work.
And so you're watching for those teams to then perform at a different level, which will then be funded further.
But it's role combinations. So if somebody starts to succeed, so let me give you a development bank example. We got one which we're about to experiment with, which is if the village priest, the head person of the village, the oldest girl still at school and the youngest boy considered a man, and an anonymous agent from the bank agree, they can spend $1,000 on their village. And then the real money can follow the village initiatives which are working rather than the people who are good at getting grants.
Right.
Now, it's a truism in development sector. Anybody who's good at getting a grant probably shouldn't be given one. And the same is true at a corporate level. The people who are good at putting forward ideas to get funding generally are saying something people expect to hear, not doing novelty.
No, that's true.
So if what I now do is I basically say, look, I've got this amount of money. If you can self-form teams and you do this stuff, you can spend the money. And then you can see what's working on a pattern of those. That's why we record the narrative continuously. Then you can see the patterns of what's working. And then the sense of direction evolves from what's pragmatic or what's practical rather than be predetermined.
And how does that happen? So how are you recording the narrative in these cases to drive that kind of to identify those points of light?
Okay, so there's 2 things. I mean, we're about to do one on end-of-life decision for children in hospitals as well. So what we do is we run a 1-day simulation in which we pull in all the roles which might be relevant. And we run real scenarios on role combinations till we know what role combination is the most effective or role combinations. So that de-risks the program. Yeah. Then we set up the system. The recording is done in SenseMaker, which is our software. Yeah. SenseMaker is based on principles of epistemic justice. It allows people to interpret their own stories. So, for example, a big one we did in the Netherlands with Leiden Institute on old people's homes. A nurse can literally take a picture of a patient, record an oral patient story, write their notes. The patient then interprets it, the nurse interprets it, so we can give real feedback on empathy very, very straight away. But I've got quant data explained by stories at scale, and I'm not dependent on text, which is the AI problem. Yeah,
right.
And we first deployed that with the US Army in Afghanistan, where we said to company commanders, you don't have to write a patrol report if you record narrative continuously while on patrol. So what we then got is we got real-time data coming in from human actors to go with traditional sensor data. And that gave us a huge improvement in early warning on improvised explosive devices. Yeah, because human beings work abductively, AI works inductively. It's why art comes before language in human evolution. We use semiotics and abstractions to handle situations for which we have no training data. Yeah, so human beings evolved to handle situations without that. So that's how SenseMaker works. So you can speak, take a picture, write something or any combination, you then place it onto a series of triangles. There are other shapes as well. The triangles all have positive qualities, so you don't know what answer the researcher is expecting.
All right.
And that's quite deliberate because it creates a cognitive load. It creates an anomaly. And the only time your brain actually engages in a decision is when there are anomalies. So you see people filling out Likert scales. They just tick the boxes, 4, 4, 3, 3. If you give them 6 triangles, it takes them less time to complete, but they have to think about the placement in the triangle. And so that gives us quant data.
It feels to me, at least engaging with this stuff for the first time, that it feels like a complex thing to get your head around. And one of the things that's something like purpose or setting out end states and things like that, they sort of simplify and allow communication. How in your system is that
There's
happening?
a big difference between simplifying things and making things simplistic. All right. And I say this is what I call a tyranny of the explicit. It's the desire to remove ambiguity. Human beings actually find ambiguity much simpler to handle. So, for example, I'll give you, one of the triangles we use in employee satisfaction. Instead of saying, does your manager consult you on a real, scale of 1 to 5, which has a hypothesis, we say, tell a story about what would you tell your best friend if they were offered a job in your company? And then people get 4 triangles. And one of the triangles says, in this story, the manager was altruistic, assertive, analytical. Now, all of those are positive, so we don't cause any stress. They're describing something. They're indexing on the positive indexes. But then as a manager, you see, oh, my God, I'm all analytical, assertive. I've got no altruism. So I need more stories like these, fewer stories like those. And that's called a micro nudge. Right. And the trouble is, the minute you run a conventional survey or the minute you have a purpose statement, people know what qualities you're looking for. Therefore, you can't trust the feedback loop.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing we do on this is, so we'll present a current situation to the whole of the workforce. This is described in the EU Field Guide, by the way, and get everybody to interpret it in a 10-minute period. Then we look at the patterns on interpretation. What that does is that identifies the 10% who've seen a gorilla. If you know the famous one about 70% see a gorilla, 83% don't. You want to find people who are seeing the world differently before you determine where you go, because you'll miss opportunities.
I think the nice part in that is that you don't get the corruption associated with, I know what you want, I'm going to give it, like the operations report at the end. You get corruption in that because they've had time to think about it, whereas you're getting the raw, unadulterated info versus the triangle bit with the manager is they're forced to tell the truth. And
at scale, and it's real time. I mean, I remember once working with one of the big utilities, and I was covert. I was actually doing field ethnography. So everybody thought I was a sort of apprentice in the yard. And the manager came in and said, okay, we need, it's balanced scorecard time, guys. This is the score I need this time so that people believe we're making progress.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
And this is how you answer the questions, all right? And it's, oh, God. Yeah. And that's very common.
Dave, you were just in just a few sentences ago, you were talking about lower energy. That triggered me. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is 101 physics, all right? And this is also from constructor theory in physics, which we developed a whole set of methods based on Deutsch's work, is whatever has the lowest energy gradient is what's going to happen. Yeah, water flows downhill, it doesn't flow uphill. And as I say, energy optimization is what evolution is about. The reason you don't use your cognitive brain unless there's an anomaly is it consumes a huge amount of energy. So you don't want to be consuming that energy unless you've really got to. Yeah. So one of the things we map, for example, before you think about a purpose statement is if you know actor network theory from Latour. Okay. So, basically it's not just human beings who have agency. So we look at actors who are humans. We look at constraints, which can contain things or connect things. And then we look at constructors. Constructors is a really important concept in physics, in quantum mechanics. It's something which transforms things, but it doesn't itself change in the act of transformation. So a software object is a constructor. A process is a constructor. So we map the actors, constraints, and constructors, and we place them on a grid between the energy cost of change and the time to change. And of course, anything top right is going to take too much energy and too much time to change. And by the way, that's generally where purpose statements end up when we do this retrospectively, because people get idealistic. And then you focus people not on trying to achieve a goal, but changing the energy cost or the time to change things they want to change, either to make it more difficult or to make it easy. So they change what's called the substrate. So what you want to do is, there's no point in having a plan to be the world's best cactus grower if you live in a paddy field. So what you first do is you actually say, what's the soil? What's the irrigation? How do we change that so it's more favorable to what we want to do before you make a commitment to what you want to do? Yeah. And again, we talk about three things, which we talked about so far. One, that's called an affordance map. What's afforded to me by the environment I'm in. An assemblage map of the narrative patterns, things which are belief systems, attitudes, which are going to influence what people think anyway, which will generally be unarticulated and unstated. They'll just be understood. It's the way we do things around here. And the other is, what level of agency do you got? Those are the three things you then try and modify.
In different pockets, I assume, because it's like the sum of all
and
pockets.
Again, we do fractal maps. So we're always gathering things bottom up. So, stimulation bottom up, and then we can represent the data at the levels of people's management responsibility.
Right.
So you never have a company-wide program. Everybody has got their own map. And, okay, you may have a comment, we all want to move in this direction. Well, where you start from determines where you're going to go anyway. Yeah.
And sorry, just as you go through that process with groups, how many realise they've got it completely wrong and need to go in a completely different direction? It feels like you're going, that must be quite a high number, because you're going to some very core fundamentals.
You can get major kickback. I mean, I'll give you a development sector example. So we did work on genital mutilation in Africa. And we did another project on Roma conditions in Hungary. Now, these are really intractable problems. If you know anything about the development sector, these are big ones. Yeah. So we use Roma kids, as ethnographers to Roma adults. And we use girls who've been subject to the horror of genital mutilation as ethnographers to people at risk and the adults in their communities. So we didn't have anybody from outside involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's epistemic justice, right? And then we got patterns of stories which were interpreted the same way, and we presented those to the experts in Vienna for the Roma project and in Washington and The Hague for the genital mutilation project. And we said, index these stories the way you think the people you're trying to create policy for index them. And then we showed them a difference.
Oh, right.
Now,
massive.
Massive. Now, there are three reactions to this. The most stupid one is, there's the most stupid, the good one, and the evil one, right? So the stupid one is, oh my God, we need to see it the way they do. Well, yeah, you could. If you went and had an horrendous operation and lived in poverty, you might see it the same way. You can't. The evil one was what we got from the anthropologists in Vienna. Well, they're wrong. We're right. We're the experts. We understand their stories.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that is actually very common, particularly amongst social scientists.
All right.
And social scientists do not like this method because they're used to being the expert in telling you what your stories mean.
Right. Which is effectively, is that the difference between kind of the top down analysis of like, I'm going to frame this.
No, it's actually okay to frame it. It's you want the data to be authentic to the people who are telling the story. You want it to be quantitative, not qualitative.
Yeah.
Quant matters, right? But then you can top down set a direction and say, well, I don't want that sort of story. I'd like these sort of stories. That's okay. So the whole top down, bottom up triangles, they don't work. You want something which is much more messy and entangled.
Let's take that then and just try and summarize from an organizational perspective, I think where we're up to, which is using a series of bottom up conversations to draw out the narrative for varying different teams and then see which of those teams are performing at a higher level and then increase the sponsorship of those teams. And that creates an emergent direction. The bit that I'm not getting is like, who's setting direction in the absence of North Star?
Now, let's look at three things, all right? So you need to map three things. One is you need to see what's even possible to change.
Mm-hmm.
So don't start off with a workshop where you decide what you would like to be. Start off with what the hell can we change anyway?
Okay.
Right? That's called affordance mapping. Secondly, you need to understand the attitudes and beliefs, and that's the day-to-day stories of the water cooler or the school gate. It's not what people tell you in a survey or tell you in a focus group,
Indeed.
because they will be gaming the response. And the third thing is, how do you determine agency?
Right.
Now, the process I talked about role-based groups of 4 or 6 roles with one anonymous role to make it up to 5 or 7, that's a way of saying, well, we got no idea what we need at all, or we've got limited ideas. So if you can assemble one of these teams, you can spend this much money, provided you give us feedback. And then we'll decide where the real investment comes. So that's more intervention side, right? But what you're doing is you're saying, where are we? What can we do next? What are the constraints? What are the constructors? Yeah. And by the way, we're now making that available for individuals. I did one with a big bank in Latin America recently, and the executives went away that night, came back having worked it out for themselves the next day.
Right.
So rather than talking about inner and outer and subconscious and inner purpose, which is bad science, by the way, there isn't such a thing as a subconscious. What they did is they said, what's the environment in which I'm working, and what can I change, and how will that then change me? Yeah, so and I think the thing is, what we're coming from now on modern science is we've had this very linear causality, and it came from systems thinking. You drive a system by deciding your goals. And my point is, that is a priori impossible if the system is a complex one.
Right.
So all you're going to do is pervert the system.
By what means, though, then, do you change the direction of a business?
More stories like this, fewer stories like those.
Right. So you're literally skimming from your teams a series of things and just say, like, more of that, guys, less of that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to make big decisions. I mean, I had to make a big one in our business the other day. So sometimes you just have to do it, all right? And say, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do this, all right?
Right, yeah.
But you don't delude yourself, that that's some sort of democratic because it isn't.
How does that come up to me as a decision maker then? Is it like a load of sound bites? What does it actually look like in terms of, like,
if you're doing things properly, you don't have to do it very often. Because, I mean, what we do, for example, is like we did with the American Army, you can say to people, you don't have to do reports anymore, provided you keep continuous narrative capture. Because what I don't want is after action review or lessons learning, because people don't remember things the way they happened. I want real time capture. So I save people time.
Right.
Yeah. Now that means I've got 3 benefits. First of all, I'm seeing the stories as they come in continuously. So I can look at customer interaction stories, I can look at internal politics, and I can see patterns in the stories, which will tell me what's going on much better than consultation, right? So that's one benefit. Yeah. The other benefit is I'm building a network that I can say, if we did this, what do you all think? And give people half an hour to respond so nobody can talk with anybody else. Right? And that means you create a normal distribution rather than the Pareto distribution on the results. And that can show me dominant views and minority views, and I'll find outliers. Yeah, and the outliers are the people I go to. These people have seen something everybody else is missing. I need to talk to them.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
And then the third thing is sometimes you just have to make a call. That's what leadership is about.
For sure.
Yeah?
How does that relate to trust? Because if you want people to be open in whatever they think, do you see them struggle with that?
No, trust is an emergent property. Yeah, if you say to people, how do we create more stories like this, fewer stories like that in your workforce, trust will emerge from that. Yeah, if you say we need to be this sort of company, the political game players will dominate, and everybody knows the political game players are dominating, so they get pissed off and they trust you less. All right.
Yeah.
It's like when we teach executives corporate communication, we break PowerPoint completely. We give them templates, and they actually fill the template with anecdotes of their own real experience. And then we take them through 5 or 6 iterations, till it sounds like a coherent story, and they can replace the anecdotes. So we make it authentic. If we built a narrative database, they can use other people's stories. Yeah, they're not making up something fictional about where the future should be. They're saying we need, this is really happening. Can we do more of this? Yeah. I mean, that's going to generate trust.
In this model, what is the leadership conversation then? So how the decision presumably of, I want them to be doing more of that versus more of that, remains a leadership directional conversation.
It does. Yeah. So, for example, we'll play around with grids using the data we've got. And then people may say on the grid, I'd really like the dominant pattern to be up here.
Right, yeah.
Right, so that's cool. So right, at your level, what would you do to do that? So you're actually changing the system by micro engagements. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean every now and then you don't have to do a macro change. That happens, but that's where leadership really comes into play. And to be honest, you might as well do something at random because it's as likely to work as anything else. Yeah?
So what is the pace of change through a process like this? Is it something that ekes out over?
No, it's actually fast and early, because if you're gathering stories continuously, you're using semiotic or high abstraction metadata, then you find the 17% before they talk with the 83%.
Right.
Right? Because if they talk with the 83%, they'll conform. People don't like to be different. If I distribute decision making, things will happen which I didn't expect would work, but now work. So I can respond to them. So I'm trying to create serendipity and surprise, continuously at a level where I can handle the risk.
And presumably, the leaders in these organizations that are going through this, who are need to be communicating quite loudly, these are the things we'd like more of.
No, they could distribute that, or they could actually ask people to come up with it and tick a box. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, we can represent it back. I mean, the whole point is, one of the ways you sell it to executives is, first of all, you spend too much time making decisions, not enough time thinking. All right. Yeah. So if we do this, so let's do a couple of things. First of all, let's map what's actually possible to change. Yeah, that's a 2.5-day workshop. Key players. Yeah. Why wouldn't you do that? Because it's going to reduce the risk and cost of change.
Right.
Yeah, it took me a lot of time to get it to 2.5 days, but we're there. All right. So first they do the map, second they do the actions. Yeah. With an overnight. That turns out to be key. And then you can say, look, we can launch this. We can find out what people really believe without them knowing what we're looking for. Now, once I've got that, let's sit down and have a conversation about what we can do now. Yeah. And it may well be things are already happening you're not aware of. I mean, the biggest threats to a company, to use the uncertainty matrix, are unknowable unknowns. And it's increasingly important to architect an organization to handle those. But the really significant one are the unknown knowns. Yeah. The things which are known in your organization, but not known to you. So this is a way of flushing that out.
The bit that I'll probably be far too literal here, but I'm trying to get my head around, like, if I was like a leader in one of the organizations that you describe, how am I actually taking in so much information? Because it sounds
easy. No, it's a doddle.
What does that look like?
You're using visualizations. We show you fitness landscapes, which are like contour maps.
Right.
Yeah, and they show dense attitudes and weak attitudes. Yeah, and we've done a lot of work the analysts can create the frameworks, but you don't depend on the analyst to tell you what they mean. So, for example, one of the big problems with employee satisfaction surveys is the consultants who create them spend a lot of money on interpreting it. Executives don't know what it means. We gather stories at scale. They look at a pattern in the story. They click on the model. They read the story. Okay. Yeah, that way they can engage with the problem. Yeah.
When you zoom right out of it, Dave, is what you're saying that instead of treating an organization like this sort of malleable thing that you can point in whatever direction that you want and put like a little tag on the front of it to say that we're going to do X, Y, and Z for the world, and then everybody will either believe that or they're going to game it anyway. Instead of treating an organization like that and an org chart, are you saying treat it like a collection of human beings out of which you're going to be able to derive?
Yes and no. You're treating, first of all, you need a hierarchy. If you don't have a hierarchy, the alpha males will create one, or if it's really scary, the alpha females will, and you don't want that.
Right.
So you want to design it, right? But then you need to build informal networks. So, for example, we use trios for that. So, for example, we use young coder with systems analysts with user trained to talk to IT people. And instead of sending out a systems analyst to interview people, we'll throw 20 of those trios at a problem. And by the way, it's easier to train users to talk to IT people than the other way around. Now, that gets richer data than the analyst. It costs less money, but we're also building networks between users and IT people, which wouldn't otherwise exist.
Right.
So informal networks are more powerful than formal systems in decision making, particularly in a crisis. So we deliberately stimulate their formation. Yeah. So you need the formal system, the informal system, and you need to constantly map the energy gradients of the system. And life then becomes a lot simpler as an executive. If everybody is within, and we can achieve this in 18 months. We can have it so that anybody through a trusted network can get access to the CEO. Yeah. So, I know I'm within 3 degrees of separation of the CEO. So I can convince this guy who already knows me, who likes me, then I'll get to the CEO. That's a healthy ecosystem.
Right. I see.
Yeah. And then if you understand what's really pragmatic and you can engage people in micro changes, you're dealing with a complex ecosystem. And it's not just the people, it's the processes, the physical building. Yeah, it's the environment people live in. It's where they go home at night. We've been doing work with one of the big oil companies because nobody wants to work for them. Nobody wants to go to the pub and say, I work for big oil.
All right.
Yeah. So how do you manage that? And that's actually been a really interesting project because what we did is we presented the greenwash statement and we presented the Greenpeace statement and we asked employees to say which they believe most anonymously and look at the results.
Wow.
And one of the things which came out of that, and I need to be careful what I say at the moment, is you need to do things. You should stop talking about what you want to do.
And start
doing it. You need to do things. Yeah. So one of the things I'm hoping they'll do on that is release 10% of their engineers' time to work on global warming.
Right, yeah.
Because, for example, refreezing the poles is an engineering problem, not a science problem. It would give us 10 years breathing space. So, actually that would cost you less than these big marketing campaigns and lobbying campaigns. But you're changing the substrate so that the things you want will take less energy. That's the big paradigm shift we're going through at the moment. That's the systems thinking to complexity science shift, which is as big as scientific management to systems thinking was in the 80s.
And maybe just to bring us to a bit of a close for this section of the conversation, at least, have you got an example or a case study of an organization that you've worked with at scale that's gone through this process and what kind of results it's been getting?
There's loads on the website if you go and have a look, but you won't find a complete recipe. What you'll find is elements. It's like the work we're doing with Hexi at the moment is breaking everything down into small parts. So the way you scale a complex system is you break it down to the lowest level of granularity, then you recombine. You don't imitate or copy. Yeah, so that's where like the chef can recombine ingredients. They don't have to follow a recipe. So you'll find examples of all the things I've talked about there. The distributed decision making, that's really new. We're running that experimentally at the moment. And just to tell you how we do things, we don't start with empiricism. Yeah, so that's a fundamental error because, this is my physics background. We always used to say social scientists suffer from physics envy, which is a deliberate play on words. They never have enough data to form any conclusion, and management consultants even less.
Yeah, right.
So what we actually do is we play around with natural science, physics, biology, biological end of anthropology. And there's one day where it all kind of like comes together and we can see there's something we can do as a method or a tool. That normally takes 5 or 6 years. So that's like the theoretical physics. Then it goes to the experimental physicists, who are the ones whose maths wasn't good enough to be a theoretical physicist. Sorry, that's no prejudice. And they play around with it for 4 or 5 years. Then when it's boring, we give it to the engineers. So that's a different approach to develop methods and tools. And it handles uncertainty because natural science is subject to peer review and replicable experiments. Social science and management science isn't. And it's like, there's a major crisis in psychology at the moment, which, given that all OD is based on current psychology, it's called the crisis of repeatability. Nobody can repeat the classic experiments.
Why is that?
Because there are too many variables. Do you remember I said they suffer from physics envy?
Yeah.
They reduce the variables so they can produce correlations. Yeah. You can't have a correlation in a complex system. All right? Or if you have a correlation, it will be misleading. And the ones I always give as examples are, one is if a country wants to increase the number of Nobel Prizes it wins, it doesn't need an educational system. All it needs is for more people to eat dark chocolate. Because dark chocolate consumption per head of population directly correlates with Nobel Prizes for head of population for the last 50 years.
The preferred chocolate type for Nobel winners.
That is a bigger data set than anything you'll ever see in any social science paper. And the one which I believe is causal is peaks in attempts to commit suicide by drowning. Right. Directly correlate with the release of Nicolas Cage movies, but I can see a reason for that.
There's a guy on the internet who tracks those.
There's a whole false correlation website. It's brilliant.
It's absolutely outstanding with things like that.
But how many agile presentations? How many social scientists? How many management science and management consultants? They go and interview a bunch of executives, and from that they produce a framework. Now you can't trust what executives say about the company anyway. Every time I've done ethnography, the reality doesn't match what the executive thinks is happening. And from that, they create a recipe. I mean, that's just fraud.
Ez, have you been looking at anything in this space?
Well, actually, I'm turning 40 next year. And yes, I know. Probably the other people in this room.
I've just turned 70, so you've got nothing on me.
Well, and I don't mind getting older. I even experience it as something good. You're getting more relaxed, and a lot of things, slide off your back more easily. And in the past 10 years, I've done quite some soul searching on different levels, trying to find my own purpose now that we've already talked about it. And I was looking into the book about Ikigai. Don't know if you know it. It's the Japanese secret to a long and happy life. And I was reading through it, and I was actually thinking about it. I'm very curious about Dave's perspective on this, especially knowing what he just already talked about. What if you just change the you into the organization? Like it's the sum of all parts. If I do what I love, I don't know if you to talk about Ikigai, it's like the combination of doing what I love, doing what I'm good at, like a profession, combining it with the world needs and what you can actually get paid for. If you have that combination, you can find your Ikigai, and it has obviously some leading guiding principles.
You got several problems. One is it's very culturally specific.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So even if I come into Europe, there is what I call North Atlantic culture, which is Northern Europe, North America, which is very much focused on individuals and individual change.
Yeah.
Whereas Southern Europe, Celtic fringe of Britain, Africa, Asia are communitarian. They're collectively based. Japan is very, very collectivist. You're defined by your interactions and your social status.
Yep.
So that is not going to transfer into an American or Northern European context. Yeah. The other point is that, it's a lovely idea, but most of the time you've got to work to earn money. And there's a lot of myths around Japan. So they do have lifetime employment. That's sensible, but it's only for a very small number of people. Yeah. And I think the danger is, and that's why we say you break things down, you rebuild them. So lifetime employment for key people. And I'll give you an illustration. When we did the turnaround on data sciences, so we were down to a penny a share. We couldn't pay the wages. It was difficult. Brought in and 5 of us went to the VCs and told them the truth. And the next day we were the only 5 left of the original buyout team. Yeah. We then did a huge turnaround on that. Right. And that was driven by an executive. Yeah, who actually understand to do it. So he reduced everybody to tears and then picked 6 of us and said, you're guaranteed a job. Yeah, whatever happens to the company goes under, I'll take you with me. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And then we got really innovative. One of the things I really enjoyed, we had to lay off 1/3 of the workforce. Sorry, I've lived through recessions. Yeah. Yeah, agile people have never lived through a recession.
Seen it, have they? No, it's never happened.
No, it's quite. It's happening. It's quite amusing. They got no idea how to bloody manage it. All right. So either way, we had to lay people off, and it was a cultural issue. We wanted people to work together. So what we did is we declared a rat infestation of the building and closed it down over Easter with an extra day. And what we did, just me and Mike worked on this. We removed every wall in the building. Yeah, so when people came in on the Wednesday, there were no walls left. We hadn't moved their furniture or their filing.
The building?
Oh, it's a big open plan one, but it was all it was all, there were no structural walls. Right. And then we actually observed who rebuilt walls with filing cabinets or booked meeting rooms. And those are the ones we fired. Now, we got HR to write it up in different terms, but that's an example of using the ecology to disclose things. Yeah, rather than trying to work it out in advance. We basically set up the environment so that people who hadn't got the culture would be visible very quickly.
That reminds me of that episode of The Office where Gareth is trying to, kind of stack things to stop Tim putting stuff on the edge of his desk. Exactly that. So, Ez, did that help you out?
Yeah, definitely. And as I hear Dave talk, I'm actually curious. It might be a personal question, but do you feel like you find your Ikigai?
When I'm on the mountains, that's my Cynefin. So I'm Welsh, all right. So as far as Welsh is concerned, it's the place where you feel you belong.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a Welsh word, hiraeth, which the English translates as nostalgia, but it doesn't mean that. It means a desire to return to a place which probably never really existed the way you remembered it, but you want to go back there.
Wow.
Rose-tinted glasses, you mean? That's
no, not rose. It's classic bloody English, all right? Yeah, missing the poetry of the concept. But this is the other point, is languages are very different, all right? So in Swedish, there's no difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they have to qualify it. They use the same language, all right? Yeah, there are lots of, Welsh has hiraeth, it has hwyl, it has Cynefin, all right, which doesn't translate as habitat, all right? And language is a key part of culture. So it's like hygge. You can't translate hygge from Denmark. Yeah. The Welsh equivalent is hwyl, but that means something very different. Yeah. So I think the danger is people are looking, it's the patent medicine market. People love somebody who sells patent medicine. Yeah. So here it is, the magical mystery, take this and everything will be all right with the world. All right. And the only solution to that, the Americans worked out a long time ago, it's called tarring and feathering.
To build on Esmee's question, though, I wonder how, if your Cynefin is in the mountains, you're clearly a very motivated individual when it comes to kind of your work life. How have you brought meaning to that?
Because I enjoy what I do, all right? I mean, I've always done what I wanted to do, and to hell with the consequences, all right? And I've got away with it because I've had good managers. Now, my sister, who is probably brighter than I am, she got a better degree, she just wants to work 9 till 5. She'll do overtime if you pay her. She doesn't want to be motivated. Her motivation comes from things she does with friends in private. And this idea that there's one universal framework is just wrong. Different people work in different ways. I'm lucky. I took a lot of risks. And I've only ever had one bad manager, and he wasn't very bad.
Right.
Yeah, and everybody else gave me room to experiment and gave me top cover. But different people work in different ways, and different people are satisfied by different days. For me, I'm never going to retire. If I retire, I'll die within 6 months. I know that. I want to do more walking. I want to do another Camino and so on. But not engaging with developing new ideas is just alien, whereas other people just want to retire and do other things. So recognize differences.
Well, look, what a wonderful note to end today's discussion on. Dave, it is always a pleasure and a challenge to talk to you. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Pleasure.
We end every episode of this podcast by asking our guests what they're excited about doing next. And that could be you got a walking holiday coming up, or it could be something in your professional life, or a bit of both. So Dave, what are you excited about doing next?
It's probably 3 things. One is we're now developing a distributed decision making to the point where it can go into engineering. And we know, for example, in the NHS, we could take out 50% of the bureaucratic cost of a hospital if it works.
Oh, wow.
That's quite substantial.
Right? And the same in hospitals. So we can have decisions made now rather than after 3 weeks of filling out forms and making arguments. And we're looking at things like end-of-life decision for children. So that one's got me really excited. Right. I think the other big thing is it's our 21st anniversary as a company this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh.
And we've managed to build a software product without any investment, or any loans. So that's not many people can claim that. So we got a big retreat coming up in March.
Oh, excellent.
In Eryri or Snowdonia, as the English call it, all right? The Welsh name is Eryri. And that's looking at how people exist with each other and with the planet and with the lived environment. And then we're going to do 2 or 3 days of walking after that around my 71st birthday. So that's the sort of second thing I'm excited by. And then the big one is the one we're now working on, which is Children of the World project. So we've done this in 3 countries. So we proved the concept, but we're now looking for funding because we want every 16-year-old in every school in the world to be an ethnographer into their community every week. So instead of relying on trying to have algorithms to tell you what's true or false on the internet, we change the input so we can rely on the input. And then we can engage young people in how do we create more stories like these and fewer stories like that at scale with government.
Right.
And that we're now looking for. And if I get that right, that's my equivalent of Jimmy Welsh creating Wikipedia.
Cool.
Wonderful. Well, very good luck with all of that. And again, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today, Dave.
Pleasure.
If you would like to discuss any of the issues on this week's show and how they might impact you and your business, please get in touch with us at cloudrealities@capgemini.com. We're all on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to connect and DM if you have questions for the show to tackle. And, of course, please rate and subscribe to our podcast. It really helps us improve the show. A huge thanks to Dave Snowden. Our sound and editing visit Ben and Louie, our producer Marshall, and, of course, to all our listeners. See you in another reality next week.